My name is David, and I'm 35 years old. I work as a software engineer, spending long hours glued to a screen, trying to fix bugs or create new features for apps that no one ever seems to appreciate until they break. My wife, Laura, is 32. She works as a marketing consultant, traveling for work frequently and always dressing like she's about to close $1 million deal. We've been married for 7 years, and honestly, I thought we had it all figured out. Everything was running smoothly, or at least, that's what I believed. I trusted Laura, I loved her, and I was certain I was the only man she ever wanted. Or so I thought. That was until the moment that shattered everything. A few weeks ago, Laura came home from yet another work trip, or so I thought. Her story was the same as it always was: busy conference, met with clients, flew back late. But something felt off that day. Her mood was different. She was distracted, and when I asked her how her trip went, she responded in a way that didn't sound like the Laura I knew. Instead of the usual chatter about presentations and meetings, she gave short, clipped answers, avoiding eye contact. It was like I wasn't even talking to the same person. Then came the bombshell: her phone. It was a typical evening. I was making dinner when I heard her phone buzz on the counter. Out of nowhere, I felt a gut instinct to check it. Maybe it was just my paranoia kicking in, but something about it felt wrong. I glanced at the screen, and my heart dropped. There was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." The world tilted beneath my feet. I had always trusted Laura. We had a great relationship, didn't we? We laughed, we shared everything, or so I thought. But there it was, the evidence staring me in the face. I immediately confronted her. My mind raced with anger, confusion, and betrayal. "Laura, who's this?" I asked, holding the phone out to her, my voice trembling. Her face went pale, and she stuttered, It's just a colleague. Someone from the conference." I didn't buy it. I knew it was a lie. "Don't lie to me, Laura. Who is he?" There was a long silence, and then, for the first time, she admitted it. "David, I'm sorry. I've been seeing someone else." Her words cut through me like a knife. She kept talking, but I couldn't hear a word. All I could focus on was the hollow feeling in my chest. How long had this been going on? Why didn't I see the signs? Her explanation came out in a jumble of half-hearted apologies and pathetic excuses, but the more she spoke, the angrier I became. "How long?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. 6 months, she confessed, barely above a whisper. "It started at the conference in Paris." Paris, the city of romance. The place where she'd chosen to betray me. I couldn't believe it. I had known about her work trips, but I had never once suspected that she was using them to carry on an affair. It felt like my whole world was collapsing around me. Then, as if the betrayal wasn't enough, Laura dropped another bombshell. "I think I'm pregnant." I stared at her in disbelief. "What do you mean, pregnant? Is it mine?" I asked, though deep down, I already feared I knew the answer. She didn't answer immediately, and the silence between us grew unbearable. I don't know," she said quietly, "but I think it's his." His? The man she had been seeing behind my back. My stomach twisted with nausea. Suddenly, the anger that had been boiling inside me turned into something darker, something I couldn't control. "You think it's his? You don't even know?" It was then that I made the decision, the one that I never thought I would make. I stood up, staring her down, and said the words that would change everything. "You're going to take a paternity test." I could see the shock on her face. She had clearly expected me to forgive her, to play the part of the hurt husband who was devastated but would try to move on. Instead, I was demanding answers, and I wasn't going to be satisfied with anything less than the truth. I knew, deep down, that the child might not be mine. The thought tore at me, but I had to know. It was the only thing that could restore my dignity. "I'm not asking, Laura," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm demanding it." Her expression turned cold. For a moment, she looked at me like I was a stranger. "You really think I would cheat on you, David?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. "After everything we've been through?" I couldn't believe she was turning this around on me. It was like she was trying to paint herself as the victim. "Don't make this about me," I snapped. "You betrayed me, not the other way around." I don't know what made her more angry, the fact that I was asking for a paternity test, or the fact that I was standing up for myself. Either way, Laura was livid. The house became a battlefield. We shouted, we argued, and for the first time in years, the love we had built seemed like a distant memory. As I stood there, her eyes narrowed in defiance, I realized something: this was no longer about forgiveness. This was about making sure I wasn't going to be the fool who stayed with a woman who didn't respect me. And so, as the night dragged on, Laura and I both knew that nothing would ever be the same again. There was no going back from this. The damage was done. I was going to demand the truth, no matter what it cost. Little did I know, the paternity test would be the least of my worries. The day after I demanded the paternity test, the atmosphere in our home was suffocating. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on us. Laura, now visibly frustrated with my insistence, barely spoke to me. Every word she muttered felt like a silent accusation, but I wasn't going to back down. I needed that test. I needed to know the truth. I had already given her too much of my trust, and now, it was time for her to prove that I wasn't a fool. What I didn't expect, however, was for the whole situation to take another twisted turn, one that would leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about my marriage. A week passed, and Laura finally agreed to take the test. I'd arranged for us to go to a clinic, a neutral ground where neither of us could back out. As we sat in the sterile waiting room, I couldn't help but notice how she was avoiding eye contact. She was still angry, no, furious, but it was more than that. There was a certain coldness in her that I hadn't seen before. Was she guilty, or was she just that good at hiding it? As I sat there, trying to suppress the growing tension, my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of Laura's co-workers, a guy named Steve. Steve was a regular name, a common name, and I'd always thought of him as just another one of the countless people she interacted with in her line of work. But I didn't know Steve well. I knew Laura had mentioned him in passing a few times, but it was always in the context of work, nothing personal. So, when I saw his name flash on my phone screen, I didn't think much of it. I opened the message, expecting it to be another meaningless update or some work-related nonsense. But this message, this one was different. David, you need to know something. I don't want to be the one to tell you this, but you deserve the truth. I know you're trying to get a paternity test, but I'm going to tell you now that it's not going to matter. The baby isn't yours. It's not even close. Please, don't hate me for telling you this, but Laura's been lying to you about a lot more than you think. I stared at the screen in disbelief. My heart pounded in my chest. The baby isn't yours? I knew I had to process what I was reading, but all I could do was stare at the message. Every word felt like a punch to the gut, but I wasn't ready to jump to conclusions. Maybe Steve was just some guy trying to mess with me. After all, I didn't even know if I could trust him. But then, I remembered something. Steve wasn't just any co-worker. He was the guy Laura had spent extra time with on a few of her work trips. They had been to dinners together, to after-work drinks, and I'd always shrugged it off. I never once suspected that anything more than casual friendship was brewing behind my back. But now everything was different. I had to confront Laura about this. There was no way I could let it slide. This was beyond just a cheating scandal. This was a deliberate, calculated web of lies, and I was tangled right in the middle of it. I didn't wait. I stood up, barely containing my rage, and walked over to Laura, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the room, her arms crossed over her chest like she was bracing herself for the storm. When I showed her the message from Steve, her face turned pale. I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes before she quickly tried to recover, her composure faltering just for a second. "What is this, Laura?" I demanded. "What did Steve mean by this? Is the baby not even mine?" She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. The words were stuck in her throat. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she finally answered. "David, I didn't want you to find out like this." Her eyes filled with tears, or maybe they were just for show. Who could tell at this point? "The baby, it's not yours. But it's not Steve's either. It's Greg's." I blinked in confusion. Greg? I had never heard of Greg before. Laura was full of surprises, but this one? This one was a gut punch I hadn't seen coming. "Who the hell is Greg?" I demanded. Laura hesitated, wringing her hands together nervously. "He's a guy I met after our first year of marriage. I know I should have told you, but I didn't want to hurt you. But it just happened, David. We were drunk, it was a one-time thing, and then I got pregnant. I didn't even know how to tell you, and by the time I realized I was pregnant, I was already too deep into the lie." I stood there, completely speechless. I was drowning in a sea of betrayal. First, it was Steve. Now, it was Greg. How many men had my wife been sleeping with behind my back? How long had this affair, or should I say affairs, been going on? And to make matters worse, she was pregnant with Greg's child, a child she had tried to pass off as mine. "Why didn't you tell me, Laura?" I choked out. "Why lie to me for so long? You've been lying about everything, haven't you?" She broke down then, tears streaming down her face as she begged me for forgiveness. She apologized again and again, but nothing she said could make me feel any better. The damage was done. I had already given her the benefit of the doubt too many times. But the worst part, the twist in all of this was that, somehow, despite all her lies, despite everything, I still didn't know if the baby was actually Greg's, or maybe it wasn't even his. Maybe it was someone else entirely. My mind couldn't process all of it at once. But one thing was for sure, I wasn't going to sit back and let her keep making a fool of me. I was done being the victim. And that, my friends, was the beginning of the revenge I'd been planning in my mind ever since that moment. What started as a desperate attempt for answers had now turned into a mission to expose every last lie and get the justice I deserved. This was far from over. There are moments in life when your anger transforms into something darker, something more calculated. When I found out the truth, the ugly, painful truth, about Laura's betrayal, something in me snapped. For the first time in our entire marriage, I realized I didn't have to be the one who was hurt. I could be the one who had the power. I could take control of my own fate, even if it meant destroying the woman I had once loved, the woman who had destroyed me. For the first time, I felt like I could win. As the days passed, I found myself plotting. I wasn't just angry anymore, I was methodical. Every word Laura had said, every tear she shed, every promise of reconciliation, it all felt like a performance. And now I was going to make her regret ever thinking she could get away with this. But I couldn't act impulsively. No, this had to be perfect. It had to be calculated, precise, like a chess match, and I was the one holding the queen. My first step was to figure out just how far Laura's lies stretched. If she had been capable of sleeping with Greg, Steve, and probably a few other guys, what else had she hidden from me? I needed to go through everything, every detail, to find the cracks in her story. I knew that once I had the evidence, once I had something solid, I could make her life crumble the same way she had torn mine apart. I started with her phone. I knew she had always been careful with it, never leaving it unattended for too long, always locking it. But when you've been married for as long as we had, you start to learn the small things, the habits, the quirks, the moments when someone gets lazy and forgets their guard is up. One night, after we'd had yet another argument about her infidelity, Laura stormed off to the bedroom, leaving her phone on the kitchen counter. She wasn't thinking straight, not when she was on the verge of tears. I knew it was my opportunity. I grabbed the phone and immediately went to her text messages. I wasn't looking for one specific thing, I was searching for anything that could show me who she really was. The messages between Laura and Greg were explicit, no surprise there, but there was something else too. A message from Steve, sent just a few hours before our appointment for the paternity test. Laura, you sure you want to do this? It's not too late to back out. If David finds out it's not his, there's no coming back from that. He won't let you off easy. At first, I thought maybe it was just Steve's way of trying to cover his tracks, but the more I read, the more I realized that Steve wasn't just some co-worker. He was involved in her life in a way that was beyond casual. It wasn't just an affair, it was a full-on manipulation game. Steve was trying to get her to not take the paternity test, trying to convince her that it was better for her to keep the secret. I felt sick to my stomach, but also oddly empowered. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. This was about a massive conspiracy, a planned deception, and I was finally starting to piece it all together. But there was still one thing I hadn't figured out: the baby. Was it Greg's? Was it Steve's? Or was it someone else entirely? I couldn't make a decision about what to do next without knowing that. So I called in reinforcements. My best friend, Mark, had always been the kind of guy who was there for me no matter what. He was the guy who helped me pick up the pieces of my life after my first failed attempt at a career, the guy who stayed up with me late nights when I needed someone to vent to. And now, I was going to need his help with this. I explained everything to him: the affair, the lies, and most importantly, the paternity test. Mark's reaction was predictable: shock, disbelief, and then anger. He couldn't believe what Laura had done to me. He couldn't believe she had gone that far. "You need to expose this, man," he said after a long pause, his voice steady. "But don't just expose her. Expose everyone. People like Laura don't get to walk away from this scot-free." I was nodding before he finished speaking. That was the plan. Not just to hurt Laura, but to make sure everyone knew exactly who she was: a liar, a cheat, a manipulator. I would make her regret everything. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. No, I was going to do something bigger. I called an old lawyer friend, someone who owed me a favor. The kind of favor that was worth a hell of a lot more than just a dinner. His name was Robert, and he was sharp. He didn't ask too many questions, which was exactly what I needed. I told him about the paternity test and the affair. I told him that if I could get all the evidence together, I wanted to make sure that Laura would never have a chance of using the baby to manipulate me, to control me. I've got an idea, Robert said. We'll make sure the paternity test is public. We'll make it so that it's not just a test, it's a statement. And we'll gather everything, all the evidence, and use it in court. I'll make sure she never gets a dime, never gets any custody. And when you're done, we'll make sure that her little secret comes to light for everyone to see. That was exactly what I wanted, but I wasn't going to stop there. There was one more thing I had to do. I had to make Laura feel the weight of what she had done to me. I couldn't just take away her ability to manipulate me, I had to take away her power over everyone else. I needed to destroy the image of the perfect wife and mother she had carefully crafted over the years. If I did this right, no one would ever look at her the same way again. So, I made a plan. I would leak the evidence. Not just a little, not just enough to shake things up. I would make sure every secret, every sordid detail of her life was exposed. I would send it to her family, her friends, her co-workers, everyone who had ever looked at her and thought she was the perfect, sweet wife. But first, I had to get the test results. I had to make sure everything was in place. The world was going to know who Laura really was. This was just the beginning, and once it started, there would be no stopping it. I wasn't just going to take my revenge, I was going to destroy her. The day I had been waiting for finally arrived, the day everything would change. Laura had no idea what was about to hit her. The anger, the betrayal, the sheer weight of everything she had done to me, all of it would finally come crashing down on her. I had taken my time, carefully orchestrating each step. Now it was time for her to see what I was truly capable of. I watched her from the couch as she entered the living room, her face still flushed from the argument we'd had earlier that morning. She was tired, frazzled, and acting like she had no idea what was coming. She couldn't possibly know. She had no clue that the walls were closing in on her, that every lie she had told was about to be exposed for all to see. "David, we need to talk," she said, her voice forced, almost pleading. I stood up slowly, deliberately, my eyes locked on hers, and I could see the flicker of worry in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. It was like she sensed something had shifted, but she had no idea what she was really up against. "You know, Laura," I began, my voice calm but cold, "you've been lying to me for so long. And I've just been sitting here, letting you think you can control this situation, but that's over now." She looked at me, a mixture of confusion and fear crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I haven't lied to you, David. I've been trying to fix things." "Fix things?" I echoed with a smirk. "You've been trying to fix things while you've been sleeping with other men, lying about paternity tests, and pretending to be some innocent, perfect wife. You don't get to fix anything. You've ruined everything." She recoiled, her hands trembling slightly, but she was still trying to hold onto her composure. She looked down at the floor, almost as if she was trying to avoid my gaze, and for a split second, I saw the cracks in her mask. She was broken. I had finally broken her. You can't be serious," she whispered, shaking her head. I thought we were going to work through this. The test, the therapy, everything. You wanted this to work." "No," I said firmly, stepping closer to her. "You wanted it to work on your terms, but you've taken me for a fool for the last time." Her breathing became shallow, her panic growing. "David, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What did you do?" I smiled, knowing that this was the moment everything would shift. "What did I do? Oh, nothing too extreme, Laura. I just made sure that everything you've been hiding, all of your lies, your affairs, and your manipulations, came to light." The panic in her eyes was unmistakable now. She stumbled backward, almost as if she was physically recoiling from the truth. "You didn't," she gasped. "You didn't tell anyone. You think I'm an idiot?" I shot back, my voice sharp. "I didn't just tell anyone. I made sure they all knew. Your family, your friends, your co-workers, I sent them everything. Your little secret's not a secret anymore, Laura, and you have no one to blame but yourself." I could see the color drain from her face, and for a moment, she looked as if she might collapse. The shock, the horror of realizing that everything she had worked so hard to conceal was now out in the open, it was written all over her face. "David, please," she begged, her voice cracking. I never meant to hurt you. I was confused. I thought I could have it all. Please, don't do this." But it was too late for apologies, too late for remorse. She had crossed a line, and now, there was no going back. "You don't get to make excuses anymore, Laura. You don't get to play the victim. You've made your bed, and now you're going to lie in it. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, I wasn't moved. I had cried enough for the both of us. I had endured enough of her manipulation, enough of her games. Now it was her turn to suffer the consequences. And then, just as I thought I had finally broken her down, she did something I hadn't expected. She reached for her phone. In a swift motion, Laura unlocked it and began scrolling through her messages, furiously typing as if she was trying to salvage whatever she could. My heart raced as I realized what she was doing. No, I growled, grabbing her wrist before she could send whatever it was she was about to send. You don't get to spin this anymore. You don't get to rewrite your story. Not this time. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something in them that I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. True, unfiltered vulnerability. She had nothing left. No excuses. No safety nets. Everything was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I did this for us, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought it would be better if we stayed together for the baby. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I had never felt such a surge of pure rage mixed with relief. Everything she had said, everything she had done, was leading to this point. It was a twisted, awful version of the life we once shared, but I was finally in control. I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her tears and weak excuses. Not anymore. The phone slipped from her hand as I pushed her back, the weight of the situation settling on both of us. You're not going to manipulate me anymore. This ends now. I turned away, making my way toward the front door, leaving her standing there, alone. As I walked out into the cold night air, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. The revenge had played out exactly as I planned. But as I stepped into my car and slammed the door shut, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This was only the beginning. The aftermath was yet to come. The aftermath hit harder than I could have ever imagined. It's one thing to execute a plan, to bring someone to their knees, but it's another to deal with the fallout of everything that happened. Laura was gone. I had pushed her out, exposed her lies, and made sure that everyone who mattered knew the truth. But what I didn't realize at the time was how deeply this whole mess would ripple through my life. My world had already shattered, and now, I was left to pick up the pieces. The first few days were the hardest. The house, once full of tension, was eerily quiet. No more fake smiles, no more pretending. It felt like I was living in some kind of post-apocalyptic world where everything had been exposed and there was nothing left to hide. The weight of what Laura had done to me was finally sinking in. I spent the first night alone, staring at the walls of our bedroom, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I missed the signs? Could I have saved our marriage? And then I remembered all the little things, the whispers of doubt that had crept into my mind over the years, the missed calls, the late nights at work, the half-hearted apologies. No, I hadn't missed anything. I had just refused to acknowledge it until it became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the betrayal of the affair that cut deep, it was the disrespect. She had so many opportunities to be honest with me, to confront me, to tell me the truth. But instead, she chose to lie, to deceive, to manipulate. And that, above all else, was what had broken me. The phone calls started to come in the next day. Her family, her friends, all of them trying to get in touch, trying to get me to forgive her, to let her explain herself. But there was nothing to explain. The evidence was in front of me, and no amount of pleading could change what had already been done. The worst part was the realization that they didn't truly care about me. They were just protecting her, defending her actions because it was easier than confronting the ugly truth. I ignored every call, every message. I didn't need her family's pity. I didn't need their judgment. What I needed was space. Time to think. Time to rebuild my life. But Laura wasn't going to make it easy. She called me, sent me texts, showed up at my door. Each time, I stood my ground, refusing to let her back in. There was nothing left between us. She had shown me who she truly was, and I wasn't willing to give her another chance to hurt me again. The day I got the call from her lawyer was when it all really hit me. Divorce papers. The final step. We had spent years together, building a life, a family, and now it was all crumbling away. But I was ready. I had already moved on. I had already won. The weight of the situation had shifted. Now, I was the one with the power. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were moments when I caught myself wondering about what could have been. What would our life look like if things had gone differently? Would I have been a better husband? Would she have been a better wife? Or were we just destined to fail from the start? Then came the moment I had been anticipating. Laura showed up at my door again, unannounced, her face pale, her eyes wide with desperation. She had no shame anymore, no pride. She was a broken woman, standing on my doorstep, begging me to take her back. I'll do anything, she cried, her voice trembling. David, please. I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I'll change. Please, let me back in. Her words were hollow, empty. They meant nothing to me anymore. I had heard it all before. The lies, the promises, the hollow apologies that only came when she needed something. She didn't even care about fixing us, she just wanted me to forgive her so she could ease her own guilt. But there was no going back, not after everything. I don't believe you, I said flatly, staring at her with a calmness that felt foreign, as if I had completely detached myself from the situation. You had your chance. You blew it. Her face crumpled. She tried to reach out, her hands shaking, but I took a step back, putting distance between us. David, please, she whispered. You can't just throw away everything we had. Everything you had, I corrected her, my voice growing colder. I gave you everything, Laura, and you threw it away for nothing. You think I don't know? You think I don't know how much you lied to me? How you threw away my trust, my love, all for a fleeting affair? She fell silent, her tears falling freely, but I didn't feel anything. No sympathy, no sorrow, just anger and the cold reality of how much she had used me. Goodbye, Laura, I said, the finality of my words ringing in the air. I don't ever want to see you again. I closed the door softly, the click of the lock sounding louder than it should have. As I leaned against the door, I took a deep breath, letting the silence fill the room. It was over. I had finally closed the door on that chapter of my life. The aftermath wasn't just about getting rid of Laura. It was about reclaiming my life. The life I had almost lost. I had to heal, to find myself again, to rebuild everything from the ground up. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be mine. I had learned a painful lesson, one I would never forget. I had given Laura a chance, multiple chances, but she had squandered every single one. Now, it was time for me to move forward, to build something better, something stronger, and in the end, that was the best revenge I could have ever taken. Not the hurt, not the anger. No, the best revenge was finding peace, my peace.